we are. All right. Hi. Thanks everyone for coming out. I appreciate you taking some time out of your workday. And my name is Trevor Grant, and I am going to give this talk called Introducing Gofannon for the AI Alliance online meetup today, April 24th, 2025. About me, I'm from Humboldt Park, Chicago. I am a PMC on Apache Mahout and a co-lead on the Gofannon project by the AI Alliance. You can find me on just about any platform under the handle Rockin' Trevo. I have two boys. There they are in this picture, maxing on some pizza on the couch, which their mom really doesn't like because she's way too into that couch, but that's what little boys do. They eat pizza and they grind it into your couch. I wrote Kubeflow for Machine Learning by O'Reilly Media, few papers on this, that, and whatever else. I've been car-free since 23, actually 22, but that doesn't rhyme and roll off the tongue so easy. So car-free since 23. And as always, a special thank you to the AI Alliance for their continued patronage of my artistic endeavors. Oh, I forgot to edit this slide. All right. So a little background on this talk. I created this deck as a meetup in a box that anyone can give anywhere for any meetup. So apparently I didn't go through it quite well enough, and I forgot things like edit this slide. So there you go. But this is the agenda of what we're going to talk about: how LLMs, tools, and agents work, an overview of Gofannon. We're going to talk about cross-framework interoperability, the Gofannon use cases, which are still kind of under construction, or at least that section of the slide deck is still under construction. We'll talk about how we're contributor friendly, and then we'll do a conclusion and kind of land the plane. Let's see. Again, I apologize. I am not used to multiple screens like this. And okay, so things like this. I forgot to drop the optional on this, but how LLMs, tools, and agents work. Fun fact, before this project was donated to the AI Alliance, it was called Llama Toolbox, and this was the logo. So you can do a lot of fun things with generative image generators now. But yeah, we'll go through this really fast just to level set and get everyone up to speed on how these things all work and fit together. So functions and tools. This example is going to use the NHTSAs. They have an HTTP endpoint that doesn't require authentication. You pass it a model year, a make, and a model, and it will give you complaints about that model, your make and model. Not using a search engine, it is a REST endpoint of a database-like thing, for lack of a better explanation. And this lays the foundation for more complex agent LLM applications, which is why we're going through it, obviously. So this is the working example. This is a small bit of Python code that will hit up the NHTSA and get the complaints, and it takes some parameters, make, model, and model year. Sends it to again, if you know Python, this is a very, very simple, almost the point that it's just silly and not even useful, but here we are. So this is the REST call you're going to use. We're also then going to give it a description. And this is something that the LLM will use to understand what tools it has. It has a description of NHTSA complaints by vehicle and model year. It explains the parameters. Think of this as like the docs that the LLM is going to use to call to get information. So that's the tools. So this is, again, and this is all exists as an example in the Gofannon repository. So don't get too caught up on the code. Again, I'm just really trying to walk through kind of how all this works, and why will become evident very soon. So again, if you're familiar with low-level sending messages directly to LLM, this is following the OpenAI API convention, but you know your messages, you've got the role in the content. So you can say, what's up with the 2024 Tesla Cybertruck? That is a somewhat difficult thing for it to figure out, but since it only has one tool, it correctly picks that which one it needs to call. So we send that message to the user, sends that message to the LLM, and the LLM will respond, all right, I need to call this function which we defined on the last one, get NHTSA complaints by vehicle, and give it these arguments: make, Tesla, model, Cybertruck, model year 2024. So, nope, I went the wrong way. You see it, the messages will append the function response. So again, I'm kind of doing some hand waving here. If you look in a lot of examples, it's always like the get current weather, and it's even sillier. So we're this, if the function name is this, it loads this tool call with these arguments, and it will make it with these, make, model, and model year. So then it appends a message of the response, which is again going to be a JSON of all the complaints around the 2024 Cybertruck. Yes. So the prompt, so your message history now consists of these components. What's up with the 2024 Cybertruck? A message saying, "Hey, call a tool," and then the response from the tool call. And you can see this tool call ID matches to here. And this is really internal accounting for the LLM to keep track of, hey, I called a tool and here's the response that I got. So under the hood, the LLM is figuring out like, all right, this tool call ID ties back to this ID of a call that I made. And then it's got this response that it will use to generate its output, which, there you go, based on the NHTSA complaints, tire blowouts, electrical system, pretty much everything. It's a Cybertruck. It's a flaming piece of garbage. Sorry if anybody drives a Cybertruck, but that's life, and yours won't be around for much longer. Okay, so agents use tools and multiple LLM calls to create the impression like that they're doing magic, but it's not. It's just lots of tool calls over and over again. We're now going to kind of shift gears, and instead of using the NHTSA, we're going to go very, very tightly with the AWS Bedrock example, which is using the IS, which is looking up the position of the ISS space station. And if you have questions, I should have the chat on. I think I heard one. Oh, no, just Tim putting the, oh yeah. So if you have questions, I've got the messages up over on the side. So just ask a question if you have one. Don't wait till the end. Okay, yep, as Tim just said as well. All right. All right. So for an agent, this is, can you tell me the current location of the ISS space station? It's going into, this is actually going to be a little bit more complicated because you've got Bedrock things going on too. And AWS Lambda, it makes everything nice and discrete in its own little buckets, but it adds just a layer of complexity to this whole thing. So if you understand this, you'll understand agents at pretty much all levels. And if you don't feel bad. But the idea is here, it's just like the tool call. You're asking a question. It's says, okay, I need to use this tool that tells me where the ISS base station is, makes that call to a Lambda, which is actually wrapping our Gofannon function. That calls up the endpoint from this ISS notify server that will say exactly where it is and some other API response stuff. And then it responds, okay, I know this. Now you've got a lot of, in addition to your tool and your result, you've got some other AWS Bedrock magic going on in here, but same thing, same idea, super simple. Now you've got a agent that is deployed at scale and can stand up to loads, and they can scale as everybody in their cat calls up trying to find out where the ISS base station is just this moment, et cetera, et cetera. But it will also then give you rationales. So in here, you have to say, okay, to get the current location of the International Space Station, I'll need to call this function. This function doesn't require any parameters, so I'll just call it directly. And then you can see that it calls that. And then if you scroll down, it gets the output too. And so the punchline of all this is that the real star of the agentic show is the tools. Everyone loves to talk about agents, but they're really just LLMs that are armed with extra tools. And in a broad computer science sense, all tools, so a tool is just a function with a description around it. So again, docs of the LLM can read. All functions broadly speaking, can be broken down into one of three categories. You got retrievers, actuators, and calculators, well, otherwise known as getters and setters, and then a calculator which just calculates something. Examples here with local weather and Dogecoin, or, so you can either get your local weather, you can open and close your windows, and you can calculate your energy savings, or you can see how badly your Dogecoin blamed. When I wrote these slides, I must have really been on a tear about Elon Musk. I don't know, man. But here we are. All right. That leads us into Gofannon. So Gofannon was originally, we were kind of making some tools and we were drifting into becoming an agentic framework. And then we decided very concisely, no, the world doesn't need an 8,376th agentic framework. We just need tools that can deploy themselves to all these other agentic frameworks. And so that was the motivating thing behind Gofannon. Okay, another optional I forgot to delete, so I should be more careful. Back what the Gofannon name and where that comes from. Gofannon was the blacksmith of the gods in Gaelic. It was a Gaelic deity. He was the blacksmith of the gods. The Gofannon is the Welsh pronunciation. This Goibniu was the Irish one, which we kind of wanted originally, but I still can't pronounce that. However, if you're a VC looking to fund something, Goibniu or Gobanos is another one that is, again, full. And we've got a full mythos right up on our webpage. If you're really interested in diving deeper into it, that's a whole thing you can do. However, blacksmith of the gods, he made the tools. He made the shields, he made the swords, he made all the things that all the gods went off and did their great things. So your agent can go off and do great things. Gofannon is just crafting the tools for you, is the idea there. And we have a large and constantly growing collection of tools. This was just me going through and looking at stuff, but archive, basic math, GitHub, there's really nothing particularly special here. This Google one is kind of cool. You see lots of DuckDuckGo and Brave search, but you don't see Google search a lot. So we do have that. Using a headless browser to get, and that becomes in really handy. Like requests get will just get the page, but if there's JavaScript, it won't render. If this is using Selenium, the headless browser, so if you want to get information off a page that requires JavaScript to render, you can use this, and that's pretty handy. Many more, and you'll see why there's so many more very soon. And the cross-framework compatibility. You can write once and run anywhere. We're going to get into this more in the next section on why that's like a really, really, really cool thing. But it is. So you can write your tool, and then using Gofannon, if you write it in the Gofannon style, you can then export it to an also growing number of agentic frameworks. And that's handy. So, well, again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll talk about that in some upcoming slides on why that's really cool. So cross-framework interoperability. So there's a trade-off across a number of things, but very, very explicitly when you're building these agents, you can concentrate on functionality and say, well, I'll defer scaling until later. Or you can concentrate on writing something that's going to be very, very easy to scale and worry about the functionality later. The problem with the first one is the problem that relational databases had. They said, okay, we'll make a really, really cool thing and we'll worry about scaling later. Well, when you try to scale relational databases, things went pretty screwy. And I'm talking about like the 90s, early 2000s. Someone told me, I wasn't there for that, but relational databases scaling in the early 90s or in the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s was very, very rough. Now with things like Spark and other things, you can argue that that's been solved, but it really hasn't, because like Spark can't do single inserts. It does scale well for reads, but it doesn't scale well for writes. There's always going to be some trade-off in a relational database because of that and your eventual consistency and yada, yada, yada. And I don't want to bore you because this isn't a talk about relational databases. The other way to do this is you say, okay, well, we'll make sure that it's scalable. I don't think that's to me. All right. The other way you can do this is you can concentrate on making it scalable and don't worry about the functionality. When you do that, the problem is, cool, you're so worried about making something that will scale really properly and like will be very elegant, and then you don't worry about your product market fit. And San Francisco is littered with defunct startups that they made this beautiful engineering nonsense, but it was for cat photos and nobody wanted to pay $1 million a month for cat photos. So that was a problem for them. And there's no right answer. It's a trade-off you have to make. Here is a very opinionated graph because I've had to work with all of these now. Small agents, great for running on your laptop. If I was just going to tell someone to get started with agents, I couldn't recommend strongly enough small agents. They've got really great documentation. It works really well. You can do some fun stuff. It does not scale very well beyond your laptop. If you're running a Google Colab or just something on your laptop, it's awesome. Once you get past that, things get fuzzy. Bedrock, very, very scalable. AWS is a steep learning curve. Now, the AWS reps will say, no, we're really easy to get started. Sure. And the small agents guys will say, we're really easy to scale. But situation on the ground, Bedrock, great if you're going to prod. Small agents, great if you're just going to be playing on your laptop. And these other guys have varying degrees of, I do not care for, yeah. Some of them are just really hard and still don't scale well. And then you've got some that they're more difficult, but they can scale. Everything's like and that's why I say that it's very opinionated. If you want to fight me about where these things belong on this graph, that's cool. Again, rock and triple on pretty much any platform. But writing once, running anywhere, to a degree, solves this trade-off. For example, you can prototype, build your agent, and like kind of get the kinks worked out and rapidly iterate with small agents. And once you get it to more or less where you want it, then with just a few lines of change of code, you can push it to Bedrock. And you're not worried about having to rewrite all your tools and rewrite this and rewrite that. It just makes things very, very easy. And that is why we went this route. It's an abstraction layer, for lack of a better word. Current frameworks that we have, LangChain, small agents, it's the same as the other. As we get more, we'll add this. We'll add logos here. This is not the official Llama Stack logo. As far as I can tell, they, weird. This is not the official Llama Stack logo. As far as I can tell, they don't have one, but I thought it was a cool Llama Stack logo that someone made up, so I choose to use it. If someone from Llama Stack wants to give me a better logo, I will happily swap them out. But again, the idea is you can write someone with small agents and deploy it to Llama Stack, or you can have your entire thing running in Llama Stack and say, eventually throw your hands up in the air and say, we want to move to LangChain. And it's at least your tools and your LLMs exist and they should move pretty easily anyway. And then your tools, you just change a few lines of code and you can import from Llama Stack and export to LangChain or vice versa, et cetera, et cetera. Use cases. This is under construction, so I'm going to be doing some hand waving and just talking here. So a few that we have just working in the GitHub repo or in the Gofannon GitHub. We've got a PR reviewer. Ours we built about a week before GitHub launched theirs. The GitHub one's really, really nice, and it's got some features that are better than ours, but ours is configurable. So if you have like something very, very specific for your stuff that you want to look at, you can configure that. Another thing that I learned that really helps attract new contributors is good first issues. So I've got a small agents running in a collab that does it now, soon to be a GitHub action, that every time a new good first issue is closed, it'll just comb through and find another spelling error, another super simple thing, and just write itself a new issue. I will make that a GitHub action soon. I have just been doing other things like writing this slide deck and other day job problems. But so that is some examples of Gofannon in action. Now a shameless plug, in addition to leading the Gofannon project, or being the co-leads of the Gofannon project, I also am one of the co-leads of an applied agents working group. We do all types of fun stuff, and really our focus on this is writing agents to actually do things. We're not thinking about specifications that agents should follow or how they should be, how to dictate how they should talk to each other. We're just building agents that work, and that is the focus of this group. And so if you are interested in building agents for specific use cases, come hang out with us because we are doing lots of fun things. And I should have had a meetup talk, or I should have had the link to get a hold of us. I will. All right. So you can see Edgar just posted the GitHub, the AI lines, replaced Gofannon with, I will type it here, agents, WG. That will get you to our applied agents working group. So looking forward to seeing you all there. Contributor friendly. And this is really the third and arguably most important pillar of the Gofannon. Oh, you like this little Studio Ghibli? It's a nice, warm, welcoming garden. I've been having a lot of fun with ChatGPT or GPT-4o's new image generation capabilities, if you couldn't tell already. So we have documentation on curated contribution pathways. I would imagine there are a fair few people here who either have maybe made one or two contributions to open source projects, or they're very interested in making contribution to an open source project. And we have curated pathways. You can, for making your first issue, which just kind of teaches you how to go through the PR process and like what that is like, how to do a git clone, how to fork the branch, how to clone it locally, how to make an edit, make a commit, do a DCO sign off. And again, this is all very clearly spelled out in the documentation for this. And then after you make a couple of those and you get familiar and comfortable with doing the PR process, we've got other documentation on how to add a new tool. And this is more than just the part I showed you where you give it the description and the function, because adding a new tool to an open source project also requires giving documentation, not the documentation the LLM can read, but the documentation that a human can read. So they know if they should add that tool to their tool set for their LLM. Also doing unit tests. When you think of doing an open source contribution, you think, oh, I'm going to do this whole thing. But really the part you're thinking about doing is about 20% of the actual work. And so going through this, you learn like, okay, here's what it actually means to add a feature to a frame or to a open source project. Adding a new framework is a little more complicated, whereas adding a tool, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be wrapping an API endpoint anyway. Adding a new, and so all you have to know is how that API endpoint works. Adding a new framework, you kind of have to understand the guts of how the framework itself works. There's documentation on how to do it. It's just a little bit more advanced, I would say, than adding a new tool. Not to say that a new person couldn't do it. We had a guy who was working on Llama Stack. I kind of just took it over from him because LlamaCon's coming up, and for business reasons, we wanted to get Llama Stack in real quick. Adding a new example. This gives you a lot more ability to be creative and do whatever you want. However, it's harder to write a prescriptive guide on how to do it because different frameworks have different things they need. So we're working on writing documentation for adding a new example. This will link to the issue. So if anybody is looking at this deck, they can click through and see what the progress on that is. And our community communicates through two primary methods. Asynchronously, we use GitHub discussions, and synchronously, we use Discord. And what that means, again, if you're not familiar with open source and how they work, asynchronous is, okay, if I'm programming from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. in Central Time in North America, that's, I think, GMT -6, how am I communicating with someone who's 9 to 5ing it in India? Because we have almost no crossover in our times. So we need to have asynchronous communication. So I can talk about something and then they can respond. So we use GitHub discussions for that. It's great. It also feeds back to your email, but you can configure your preferences to know how it does. So yeah, GitHub discussions is what we use for asynchronous communication. But sometimes it's easier just to like have a quick back and forth and chat in real time. And for that, we use Discord. And we strongly invite and encourage you to join both of these things. Just explaining, because one of our calls to action is for you to get involved with this community and make some of your first contributions. How we communicate is a good first step and thing that we want to have on this. Another thing we have, there was some fun. I woke up in the middle of the night and had a fun idea, and then I made it the next day, is we've got this fun little leaderboard that different PR labels get you different points. In fact, I'm doing okay on time, so I'm just going to jump over and show it. So we go to here and here. So Different PR labels get you different points. A cowboy PR is when you make a PR and don't wait for a review. You won't have to worry about doing that. That's something maintainers do, and it's a really nasty habit, so we dock ourselves hard for it. But yeah, if you bash a bug, 250 points. You fix some docs, cool, 100 points. A new framework is a heavy ask, that's 2,500 points. A new tool, heavy but not as heavy, 500. And so on and so forth. And then as you go down here, this is recalculated every time a PR is closed. And you can see the current leaderboard, and I've got the most because this is my day job, and so I'm working on this thing. And I'm probably not as harsh on myself with Cowboys as I should be, but there we go. All the way down to Andrew Musselman, who I think is actually on this call. He made a couple of Cowboys. He's much more honest with his Cowboy, calling his Cowboy PRs what they are, and so he's got negative 800 points. So that is a fun thing that we have. And I was talking about other. So there's a documentation. Here's a quick start that gives, again, this kind of same overview of tool calling. We also have the first contribution. And again, really, really Crayola. Like, you need to have Python 3.10 or higher installed. You need to download Git. You need to have a GitHub account. You need to fork a repository. This is just going through, like, by the numbers, how to make APR. And for some people, they're going to be like, hey, that's too slow for me. I know how to do these things. Cool. You can jump in at contributing a tool. And again, very, very easy. You find, add an issue to the processor. And this is an important one that most people forget. They just come in hot with like, oh, I'm going to just dump this tool on you. Please at least make an issue first so we can talk about it. And just a little bit of talking on the upfront can usually save you a lot of time on the back end. And that's true for this repository and any repository. It's just good software development practice. You can find a simple REST API. And then again, it just walks you through step by step. Like, this is pretty easy. Documentation you need, how to make a unit test, all the way up through submitting your PRs. And all the way down to framework integration. So that is, like I said, lots of documentation on this. So I'm getting ahead of myself. Time to land this plane. Some calls to action. What we covered. What are LLMs, tools, and agents, and how they work. Quick overview of Gofannon. We talked about the cross-framework interoperability of Gofannon. I think, we touched on some Gofannon use cases, though lightly because that section was still under contribution. And I hopefully have made the case that this project is very contributor friendly and we want you to come get involved. So joining our community, and there is a joke here. I was in the Army. I was a medic in the cavalry back in 2008, right before the surge in Afghanistan. And when you're being told to enlist and you've got your nice recruiter, you smile them and you look them right in the eye and you raise your hand and you walk away from the enlistment center because you do not want to re-up. This was actually an artifact from ChatGPT. It just had the arrow going the wrong way, but I'm like, hilarious, ship it. So also star us on GitHub. Other joke in this one, GPT-4o thinks that you look through telescopes with your nose. So again, I could have probably had to correct it, but I chose to let it go. And give a talk. Like I said at the beginning, this entire deck is presented as a basis for you to take crib. You can add more stuff. If you write a really cool tool and you want to give your talk 90% on that tool, you will notice that I think I'm coming up on 30 minutes and I'm in the conclusion section. So there's not that much time left. Given a 50-minute talk, you'd have 20 minutes to talk all about your cool tool. And again, this deck is right here and set up and ready and waiting for you. I believe it's on the website somewhere. It's linked back, but at any rate, it exists. Contributing a tool. There's a QR code that links to the contributing a tool. However, I moved some stuff and I kind of broke the QR code. So until I get the redirect set up, this is not working at the moment. However, the contributing a tool documentation is, so please, contribute a tool. It's great. It's fun. And then you can brag to everyone that you've contributed to an open source AI project. And with that, I will finally take a breath and breathe and see if there are any questions.
Great. Thanks, Trevor. All right. Let's see. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? Feel free to, you can add them in the chat here.
And if not, I'm going to demo for you. So you should ask questions.
Let's do that because I think we've got some comments, but no questions yet. So I'd love to see a demo.
All right. Demo. All right. First demo. Also, another call to action that wasn't in the slide deck. If you go to the web page right here, I will paste this in the thing. This video I made with, it's 100% generative AI. There's a logo. The logo guy starts talking to you. There's a video game that was generated video. The video game does not exist. The only parts of that were not generative AI were, I think there's some text that shows up on the screen. I added in with iMovie. And there's a part where, oh yeah, because the guy doing the voiceover, that was all 11 Labs. He's got this kind of, you can't quite pin it down if it's Scottish or Irish or Welsh, which was kind of the whole point of this Gofannon dude too. And yeah, so I highly recommend checking out the video. It is a treat. You must, I highly recommend. And then, okay, I'm going to get, see, I'm trying to answer Steve or let him talk. Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
So, just at the most highest sense, just so that I know I got my head wrapped around this correctly. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, I'm a Java guy. So you guys are like the hibernate on top of relational databases. So you define some interfaces that I can write into, and then you handle all the messiness to plug into the agentic frameworks underneath. Like I said, I want my tool to do this, and I know I want it to do this, and then I want it to do this, and I don't care what agentic framework is underneath. I just want this to happen. So if I go somewhere and they're using Llama Stack, great, I don't care. Or if they're using Bedrock, great, I don't care. I've already written my stuff. You guys are going to handle that translation layer. Is that basically what it is at the highest level?
Yes, asterisks. You were talking about, did everybody else hear that question too? I'm not sure how Meetup works on that. Can I get if anybody in the chat can just give me a +1 if you all heard that, or if I need to repeat the question.
Yeah, I would repeat it because Steve, whatever reason your voice is low, but I heard it, but it was, I got to really turn up my volume.
So the gist of it was that is this an abstraction layer that the author doesn't have to care so much about what's going on underneath, and they can just move their tools quickly between Llama Stack or other agentic frameworks. Steve, would you say that's and a one? I know that you had a lot more questions in there. Okay, I got the thumbs up that's close enough. I'm going to go into, it's a good call out and something I probably need to work into these slides a lot better. Because I'm giving this slide deck as though it's an idea for a project that doesn't actually have any meaning to it yet. So let me get into this demo because I think this is going to answer those questions for you. And I'm going to back pocket that I need to address that more in the slide deck that I'm making. So this is the Llama Stack. This is a demo for Llama Stack. It is not merged yet. It is sitting, it will probably merge. I promise it will merge by Friday afternoon. But so this is the Llama Stack. And to install Llama Stack, it's kind of a whole thing. I really just cribbed off of the Llama Stack. There's a collab about getting started, and then a example script on how to use tools for Llama Stack. So I heavily cribbed off of those files. So you're not going to get a lot of here's Llama Stack and how it works in here. And that's kind of by design, because should Llama Stack change anything, I want you to go back to their documentation, read all that. But all right, so in my here, the first cell, I'm installing Llama Stack, and then it does this whole thing. There's a lot of output here, so I'm just going to hide this. And then you start the server, and it kind of putzes around. This is actually running because I've got it in my. It takes a little while to do, so I fired it up before the meetups started. And it's firing up the server in the background, being hosted locally at port 8800. And then you install the Llama Stack client. And for some reason, it also there's a way to do it with Ollama, but all right. The problem is if you run it with Ollama, then you need the Colab to have a T4, and that can be troublesome depending on when you try to run it. So we ended up using the Together AI API key because then it'll run on CPU. And the reason that's better is then I can have it be automated testing in the repository. So if you go sign up for Together AI, they'll give you $1 in free credits. I don't even think maybe you have to sign up with Google, but I don't think you have to put a credit card in. So it is what it is, and I apologize. There's other demos for doing things with other frameworks, but that's what we're doing with this one. So the Together AI API key, but it's not running locally. So again, it will run on CPU. So any laptop you have, you got a 2006 PowerPC MacBook Air, great, it'll run. Available models, it just lists, and there's a bunch of these meta ones. I actually have not played with this too much. This is the first time I really used Together. I picked the tiniest and dumbest one I could find, a 3B turbo model, which I don't know why you need a turbo model at such a small, but there it is. All right, so just to test and make sure that the thing's even working, here's a 2-sentence poem. And again, I'm just cribbing off their getting started guide at this point. Here's a 2-sentence poem about Ollama. Cool, it works. That means I've got a live connection. Great. Next, I'm going to install Gofannon. Now, in reality or after Friday, you could just pip install Gofannon. I've got to install this special branch just because I've got the Llama Stack magic in my branch. So until that merges, it's here. But yeah, pip install Gofannon normally. Creating the tool. So the original example used, I want to say a DuckDuckGo or maybe Brave Search. I forget which search engine it uses. Gofannon has a Google search tool. There's this weird backdoor way that you can have a private Google search and use it as a tool. It's kind of a thing to set up, and you end up having to have an API key and then an engine ID. There's docs on how to do it in the Google search tool. I think they point to the Google docs about how to do it. But if you're trying to arm your agents with Google search proper, this is a way to do it. So then, and now here's where the magic is that hopefully will answer Steve's question. That tool, I just export to Llama Stack. Now, let's say Small Agents has some other cool tool that I want to use. I can load that tool, and then I can import. I can import from. So every tool framework, just about, MCP doesn't have an import from, but you have an import from and export to. So you can pull tools out of LangChain, use them in Small Agents. Pull them out of Small Agents, use them in Llama Stack. Pull them out of wherever. Oh, you also can't import from Bedrock because Bedrock doesn't have a tool repository, but you can export. You can pull something in from Small Agents, export to Bedrock, however you want. So that is, to Steve's point, it's not quite the abstraction layer I think you were talking about, but that's the abstraction layer right there. So you don't, now for silly tools like simple REST calls, okay, probably not necessary. Okay, it's maybe somewhat convenient, but it's not the end of the, fine. But when you get really, really complicated things like ServiceNow or just very, very complicated API endpoints, you don't want to have to rewrite the whole thing because that's where errors happen. So you can test it with Small Agents, say, okay, on Small Agents, I'm using ChatGPT 4.0 and I'm using this tool. And then when you go to Bedrock, you say, okay, I'm still using ChatGPT 4.0 and this tool, and you should expect the results to be pretty close to the same because you're using the same model and the same tool. And that's, go ahead.
So can I follow up? And I should sound better now.
Yes, much better.
I was using the wrong mic. So it's not that you're like this magic translation layer. It's that you, in the sense of at runtime, it's that you actually allow me in my code to take a tool from one place and insert it into a stack in another place. Like you are a cross compiler is a little bit more closer to what you're doing in a certain sense.
Yes. Okay. Because different agents have different ways that they load their tools up. For instance, Bedrock, you got to set up a Lambda, an ARM, and all this other stuff. For Small Agents running on your laptop, you just pass a list of tools. And so yes, to your point, yeah, it's more akin to that than I think the latter than the former, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then when you create the agent, then, okay, so case in point, You create the agent, you got the client, you set the model. Again, this is all llama stack stuff. And then you pass in your tools and your tool set. So the way llama stack passes in tools, it's a list of llama stack style tools that are passed in here. Now, small agents will want a list of tools that are of the small agent tool class, and LangChain wants, everybody's got their own special little class that they want their tools to come in at. Except llama stack, they're actually shockingly cool and they don't require at least Pydantic at this level, which is nice. But then the question here is, who's the 42nd president of the United States? Now, this is, again, a very small and not particularly intelligent model, and it only even thinks to call the tool about 1 time in 3. I can run it again real quick. So here you see it's working. It query, okay, user, who is the 42nd president of the United States? The model thinks, oh, I should use the Google search tool and query 42nd president of the United States. It executes. Here's the result. Bill Clinton. I think there's a Wikipedia tool in here somewhere too that I somehow missed. I need to go look for that. I just thought of that. I don't know. But at any rate, it gets the snippet back from Wikipedia, and then it reads, the LLM reads that and says, okay, Bill Clinton was the 42nd president. When you run it at home, oh, there, I figured it out again. It's going to make a liar out of me because, yeah, okay. Well, when I was running it earlier, it has a hard time. So if you're running this, if you're playing at home and you do it and it just comes up with nothing, just run it a few times. It takes a little while to figure out that it should call the tool. My guess is it's cached at this point, so it just knows to do that, but whatever. Yeah. So that is that. All right. Other question. Cool. Lucas, question. Do you plan to include guardrails features? We don't. And this okay. So question 1, do you plan to include any guardrails features as part of Gofannon? No, we are explicitly trying to keep Gofannon just a collection of tools. Guardrails are important, and I don't mean to in any way imply that they're not. They're just out of scope for this project, which is just about tools and being able to pass tools between different agentic frameworks. Question 2, do you plan to include them? Again, same answer. Not to say that it's not important. It's just we're going down that, and you will see kind of stubbed out code that looks like orchestrators, and us realize like that code has now been abandoned and needs to be okay, yeah, 2 and 3. You will see code that looks like we were starting down that path that I haven't ripped it out yet because I'm not sure if anything depends on it. I don't want to break anything. So I just need to take a weekend and try doing that. And I should probably do it sooner rather than later as we keep getting more popular. That becomes harder and harder to do. But yeah, so earlier to Lucas's questions, originally we were kind of drifting in that direction, but then made a hard pivot to say, no, that is out of scope. That is something that an agentic framework should handle. That is not something that the repository of tools should handle. It's just out of scope. I don't mean to imply that it's not important. It's just not what we're focused on. But it was a great question, Lucas.
Okay, I think that puts us at the end of the current list of questions. I'm going to follow up on a simple question here. I think you already covered this, but maybe I just didn't quite get it, which was, so you've got a tool, it's been written for Gofannon, and you now are using it with a framework, let's say Bedrock. If you're using Bedrock, do you also use something like LangChain, or those are totally separate? Like you would not use both of them?
So you can run LangChain on AWS, and there are guides on how LangChain and AWS kind of sort of work together. However, when we're saying Bedrock, we're talking about just the pure AWS implementation. If you were going to use a Gofannon tool on LangChain on AWS, then you would export to LangChain and build it like at that layer, and then you're doing the LangChain distribution method, which is also why on that one slide with like the kind of, I don't know, the different arrows, LangChain, like, yeah, it kind of runs laptop. It also kind of runs AWS, but it's kind of complicated. Does that make sense? Or did I just talk in a circle?
Well, kind of, yeah, it made sense. I was just kind of wondering, are those like I never quite I guess it's more of a bedrock question, so apologies. But there's a follow-on question that I need to understand this first part too, which is does bedrock? I always felt bedrock was more like fundamental components versus like in LangChain also does more like orchestration and that kind of stuff, or does bedrock also do orchestration?
Bedrock does orchestration too, because agents are the hot buzzword of 2025. So everybody in their cat has to do agents because their boss told them to go do agents.
Okay, got it.
Whether or not
Okay, so
not, they have to now.
okay, so that makes more sense. Okay, so if you got a tool you've built and you can deploy or use with Gofannon, and it's meant, or it originally was created and tested and run on Bedrock, but now that tool, you have a customer who wants to go and run that over on LangChain. I know you answered this, but I didn't quite understand it. Like, how much work needs to go into making that now work with LangChain?
So Bedrock doesn't maintain a repository of tools in the same way that like LangChain does. So let's say they got something that worked. Somebody built some really cool tool for small agents. Small agents originally was also just going to be a repository of tools, and they kind of drifted into becoming an agentic framework. But let's say somebody built a tool for small agents, but now they need to deploy it on their LangChain cluster because that's what their company does. They just use LangChain. So in that case, it is, see if I can, I've got a test case that shows the entire thing. I think there's a round trip down here. Yeah. So you import it from LangChain. Yeah. You import it. So you've got the LangChain native tool, which is edition. This is LangChain's edition. I'm pretty sure. Nope, that's maybe not a great test, but in theory, this should still work. So you've got a LangChain edition. That's why it's a LangChain tool. So this is a LangChain tool. Now you can import that from LangChain. So you've got just a blank tool. This is basically just a blank tool. And then you import that your LangChain tool into that. So now that blank tool has been overwritten with a LangChain tool. Now your imported tool, which does addition, you're checking, it still adds 2 and 3 equals 5, and the name is still addition. And then you can export it to small. Now you can export it to small agents, and small agents, instead of forward is their function to execute, but 4 and 5 equal 9. Does that make sense? So instead of having to rewrite the entire tool, you just rewrite, you just do an import to and export from, and it makes it a lot easier. And again, for a simple tool like addition, you're probably better just to rewrite the stupid tool, or I'd be shocked if your framework didn't already have an addition tool. However, if it's a very, very complicated tool, errors happen when you start migrating things. So you can just do it like this and you get your migration for next to free.
Nice. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. It feels a little bit like magic, but I'm sure
when you do things right, it always does.
That's pretty cool. Okay, got it.
All right. Another question. Does Gofannon plan to include tools specifically for data processing tasks like cleaning or analysis? Yes. And I knew there was a major thing in the AI Alliance agent working group. We're doing one on database analytics. We have a customer, somebody who's interested in saying they just want to talk to their big SQL or their big relational database, and they want to ask things like, let's say you've got a database of sales reps, and you want to say, all right, tell me all the sales reps who exceeded their sales or their per diem, whatever the maximum that they're allowed to spend on dinner. And it will just go and can go out, write those queries and things like that, which sounds like text to SQL. It's a little bit more than that. But yes, to answer the question directly, we do plan to include tools for that. If you are interested in it, welcome those tools, because different use cases will have different cases they need.
And looks like a follow-up question there. If that's the case, how do you plan to realistically compete against LangChain?
All right. So the first part of the question is Gofannon writing its own tools in addition to supporting LangChain and Bedrock? And this is, again, the clarification I want to make is we don't plan to compete against LangChain at all. We are a repository of tools. So when it comes to, and LangChain has a very, very robust bench of existing tools. And aside from Google search and maybe that headless browser get, I think the Wikipedia, the archive, and a lot of those already do exist in LangChain. And so that's a fair question. But as we expand out, KX is a time series based vector database that is somewhat niche and obscure. And we're talking to them about getting an integration in. And the value for them for doing that is they can write it once, and now they support, well, at the moment, 7 different agentic frameworks, and that number is growing all the time. So with minimal resources, they can support more agentic frameworks. So to answer your question directly, is we do not plan on competing at all against LangChain. We are complementary. But I understand the confusion because the simple functions we're doing, people also wrote those simple functions for LangChain, for small agents. You'll see a lot of these functions are like, a lot of these functions exist already in these other frameworks, so there's not a lot of whiz bang to them. The idea is, especially if you're writing a very, very in-depth tool. See, so if I write Gofannon tool, then can I use an MCP language? Yes, that is the 100% correct. So we do have an MCP integration, and I want to say even an example. Let me go back here. Could have sworn. There we go. So here's an MCP server with Gofannon tools. A Gofannon MCP client was a little bit out of spec, again, especially for the notebook. However, in here, I believe we write, which tools did I include? Oh yeah, just the addition. So it wasn't, again, it was nothing particularly great, but so add an addition tool, export to MCP, and then it writes the server.py. So if you go into it, there is if you run this job, the export to MCP creates your server.py, and then when you just run your server, it will have your Gofannon tools in there. So to Joy's question, if I write a Gofannon tool, then can I use an MCP? Yes, you can. And then here's the better use case. As I was saying, LangChain has a really, really deep bench and like a huge library of tools. You can pull tools from LangChain and then host them in MCP. There may be other ways to do that as well, but that is a out-of-the-box feature of Gofannon. Does that answer the question, Joey? Cool.
It's just, yeah, definitely more integration or interoperability capabilities than I had thought it had. Pretty cool. Okay, we are at the top of the hour, so we should be wrapping things up pretty quick here. So if those of you who need to go, obviously you can go. If you want to stick around for a second, we can wrap things up. I just posted, or no, I'm going to post, here you go, that link to I think that's the YouTube video that you had shared earlier, that 4-minute video. So share that there with you folks. And let's see, any other questions?
I'm going to drop my email in the chat. Feel free to hit me up as well. Yeah.
That's right. Great.
Steve, if we're just hanging around, can I ask one more like really general question that's more about agentic? Do we have time for it?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have time. I mean, I have time.
So another very high level question, Trevor, as I'm trying to get my head around all this agentic stuff. I'm app dev, but data scientist, but also app dev. And what I'm kind of feeling and way I describe when people come up to me and say, what's all this agentic stuff? What I basically say is it's microservices for AI stuff, basically, with an LLM in the middle doing some translation, right? And I think that's because the data science world likes to make up new terms for things that are already well defined in other places to make themselves feel
Everyone, don't just blame that on data scientists. Everybody.
It's true, but it's particular. Come on, bias instead of error. I mean, okay, but we can have that discussion
you
over beer
mean
at some other time.
the analytics guys who just invented a new term for their entire industry? Yeah, they like to make up new words for things.
Yes, but so is that characterization of the agentic frame? I mean, so it leans on a lot of the same things. Like I noticed you're talking about serverless a lot, right? So that's the same kind of thing that people do. Like you don't have to do serverless with agentic, but it lends itself towards it because you don't know how often that tool is going to get called, and so you want it to scale to zero and stuff. But is it basically like microservices for ML, like putting together ML stuff, an ML tool chain?
Yeah, so when you get really into the agentic, and that was what I was trying to get at with the first few slides, as much as everyone likes to talk about it and make like a big gajillion-dollar VC fundable thing, it's really not that exciting. It's tools, and the LLM can just make multiple calls. That's agentic. Once you got tools and agent, the thing can make multiple calls. You've got yourself an agentic LLM or system.
Okay, thank you.
That's yeah.
Yeah, and just to add my 2 cents.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just to add my 2 cents, coming from the API microservices world for so long. Microservices, if you guys remember, microservices ended up becoming like it was a large application. Like a microservice wasn't really like just a small, container with just a little bit of code in it. Usually you had like a team of people working on a microservice, and it typically was a fairly like a full-blown application. And whereas a lot of these, it seems like are fairly like tools are fairly small, so they are more sometimes in like that runs in a small container type situation, and it just feels very different to me. And then like we called our meetup in San Francisco, like we had to say the AI agent meetup, right? Because like agent is already a overloaded word, so we threw AI in front of it because I agentic, I don't know, feels weird to me, so we went that way. But yeah, it seems like it's just more of a differentiator. I'm just kind of adding on to what you guys are already saying, but that definitely seems true to me. Okay, so let's see. Thank you. Got some thank yous here. Pretty sweet. Okay, you get some good, nice congratulations and thank yous there, Trevor. So I'll add to it.
Andrew Musselman, I think. Andrew, do you still have a question?
Well, he did have a hand up, but then he said he
no. I meant to give you a thumbs up, and I did a hands up instead.
No problem.
Thanks for giving the talk. This is really good.
Thanks, Andrew. Andrew's another co-lead on the project. For what it's worth, he's a plant.
Yeah, happy to see anybody here.
Nice. Excellent. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll wrap this up then, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, hope to see you online. Take care, everyone.
Don't forget to start a repository and introduce yourself in the discussions.
Oh, is there a social place to hang out? Like, do you have a Slack or a Discord or a...
Yes, we do have both. In fact, before we shut this down, let me get the...
Oh yeah, we should be promoting the Discord. We're kind of just getting that going, so you can be early. You can be one of the cool kids.
Actually, we do some work on the Gofannon and the Gofannon Discord. We've got a few contributors we've picked up, and so that's for the synchronous communication. So let me find it. There's an invite link. Boom. This should get you into the Discord. And then for the asynchronous stuff, we've got, like I said, GitHub discussions, which is just a slower amount of communication. You can come into the repo, you go to discussions, come on down to introductions, and just make a new one and say hello. So both work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you around.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Trevor. All right. Take care, everyone.